dollars to invest, will probably invest in land or, some real estate projects.
Yep.
Nothing exciting and nothing to really support the next great set of local entrepreneurs.
Yep. Yeah. I think you're bang on there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let me welcome Amin.
Hi.
How are you doing, Amin? Welcome.
I'm fine. I'm sorry. I was in backstage. I was waiting.
Yeah, I had the same issue, Amin.
Okay.
So Amin is the co-founder of Afrobytes France. And I mean, I'm just going to give you a minute to just sort of tell us a little bit about Afrobytes and about what it is that you do, so the audience has a bit of background on you.
Okay. Actually, Afrobytes, we are based in Paris, and what we try to do is to give African tech a global stage, so out of its border. So we try to do the job out of the borders. Okay. We try now to connect startups with, for example, the corporates here, so they can maybe make some businesses. Because we have this investment problem, okay? So if we have this investment problem, maybe we should focus on business. That's another way to get the money. So we are really focusing on that, how to connect, to bring clients, basically, to African startups, African entrepreneurs, but also consulting firms, also medias, how we can be a spearhead for business here in Europe.
Gotcha. Fantastic. I'm going to come back to you in a moment, just because we're talking about sort of the source of funds that are being invested in Africa. So not just where the money that VCs or PEs or other investors are actually putting into Africa. But Seka, let me speak to you about sort of where are, sort of what kind of investors are funding your businesses, the businesses that you work with, and in turn, where are those investors getting cash from?
Me?
No, Seka is gonna. This is for Seka. Yeah.
So for us, it's just it all comes from the West also, and more or less looking at your institutions like your universities, your pension funds, and also like your DFIs. So that is one. And then the other thing that's new for us now is family offices, because family offices now are looking into actually getting into the VC space and saying how do we fund VCs. But the other thing, one thing though has been like all of these family offices are not Africa based. They're not African based. They are from either Europe or from North America. That's where most of every investor that we speak from is coming from, and they usually from either university or family offices.
Okay.
So that is what we've been seeing with Vilema and the investors that we speak to.
Okay. So I'm going to ask Amin actually now to jump in on this. So we've talked about most of the funding that's coming in is coming from Europe. It's coming from the West. I will actually speak to the fact that there's also increasingly more money coming from Asia as well. So we do have money coming from the East. But I guess, when these fund of funds, your DFIs, your pension funds, when they're investing, is there a particular perspective? Are there things that they're looking to accomplish when they're putting money? Obviously they want a return. We know they want a cash return. But beyond that, what are their other goals? Why are they investing in Africa?
Okay. There's so much to say about this question of investment.
Okay.
Let me start by something you didn't ask me, but I will respond to a question you didn't have. Okay. The first thing is that everyone in Africa is like, oh, why don't they invest in us?
Okay.
Guys, we are here, okay? Why is it so difficult for us to find an accommodation? Why is it so difficult to find a job? Why is it so difficult? We are basically have the same problem.
Okay.
We don't want to put a name on it.
Gotcha.
Okay? So I think at one point we have to put a name on something.
All right. Do you have any names? Do you want to offer us one?
Yeah, because I will tell you, I'm in the tech ecosystem in France since the late 90s. How much time? Okay, 20 years. I met one single guy, who raised more than $1 million in France in tech.
Okay.
In 20 years. How many people of African descent who have raised to do a project in Africa. How many do you know?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you.
I mean,
a few more, but yes.
And so
challenging.
We can turn around the topic like forever, but after 5 years, I'm like, okay, I get it now. It's okay.
So, I mean, yeah. All right.
So that's why we are focusing on the business. Okay. After, fortunately, it's not everybody is not thinking this way, and some are investing in Africa. Okay. And sometimes there are strange expectations. Okay. I will give you an example. Let's say you want to invest in Senegal. You go in Senegal and you're like, okay, but the size of market is very small. So my LPs, I told them we will do unicorns. Okay, so I go and I say I want unicorns. So the founder is like, okay, I'm going to be a unicorn too. So it's like,
everybody's expectations.
Everybody wants to do a unicorn. Nobody knows what it takes to do a business. But at the end of the day, the guy in Senegal say, okay, so because my market is too small, I will do Senegal, I will do Mali, I will do regional stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, I will go with this promise. And the guy in front of me say, that's good. I will give you $1 million. What do you do with $1 million? I mean, seriously. Imagine you are in France and you go to see an investor and you say, I'm in France. I'm going to be the first in France. I'm going to be the first in UK. I'm going to be the first in Belgium. I'm going to be the first in Spain, in Italy, with $1 million.
Okay.
This
Very
is
good point. I hear you.
This is totally crazy. And the difference between a Senegalese guy and a Mali guy is the same as a French and a Spanish guy.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you pointed out a few things. One is we've got European funds funding African startups or African sort of businesses. And there's a very distinctly European perspective as to why they're funding other Europeans or other Westerners rather than themselves. You've not put a name to it, but I'll leave everyone to put whatever name they want to it.
Exactly.
And you pointed out the other problem of expectations mismatch. And so people are putting in money and they're looking to build unicorns because that's what makes it interesting for them from a scale perspective. But then you're trying to build a unicorn by building a business across 5 very, very different markets or whatever number of different markets you've promised that you're going to aggregate to build a large enough business. Okay. So Titi, let me talk to you about sort of angel funding because I imagine you have a different sort of perspective in that, or a different approach, in that angels basically are usually they're people who are local to these economies anyway.
So we thought until COVID hit.
All right. What percentage of angel investors sort of across Africa or across Nigeria in each of your sort of, what percentage are local versus international? What are you seeing? I mean, this is going to be wrong.
Angel investing is just starting to scratch the surface. We're not showing up on the radar yet.
Of course.
As far as I'm concerned, because if you look at, last year, I think we crossed the $2 billion mark in terms of inbound investment, which is why we're having this conversation. Because if you look at the $2 billion, 85% of it went to white faces and only 15% went to black faces is why we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
On that scale, angel investing probably represents, maybe 100 or 200 million of that total. But good news is it's in growth. Okay. When you consider, we couldn't even talk about $5 million of angel investing just 5 years ago. Now we're starting to see the work of the Cairo Angels, the Lagos Angels. We're starting to see places like South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt, which are the traditional diamonds in terms of destinations, outgrow themselves. We've got Accra, we've got Senegal, Dakar, all the way through to Morocco. They're all growing, but by and large, that's a long play. It's going to take us 10 years before we even see anything that's meaningful in terms of substance or volume when it comes to angel investing. But if we leave that alone for a minute and look at the VC funds and its origination, which is really the conversation we need to be having, what we need to do is start to look at our own pension funds. We need to start to look at, our own institutional fundings and start asking the question as to why aren't they the funds of funds going into VCs? Because type form is not something we can change. Okay, by right, if American taxpayers and American pensioners, are putting money, yes, to develop Africa, they have the right to say, we believe Americans can lead a better team than you Africans can. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but those are the facts. So if you want to play, step up to the plate. We've got pension funds. It's not that we don't. It's just they don't invest in startups. They don't do funds of funds. That's what people like E have been fighting for legislatively in Nigeria for the last few years. Those are the things we need to do to start to address it, because this is not a charity.
Yeah.
Okay. This is about making money.
Yep.
All right. And if I bring my money to the party, guess what? I expect to get a return for it.
Well, I think it's not, let me challenge you on that and just say, is it about getting returns, or is it about dictating the terms on which that money is even invested? Because from a return perspective, I don't believe there's any sort of data. And I asked this question, I asked some of this, is there any data showing that sort of foreign founders are doing better in Africa than?
No, it's not about that. It's not about that. Okay. I'll give you something that's happened just in the last 24 hours as an example. All right. Yeah. I have somebody I call my French daughter. She was a consultant when I was a partner at Ernst & Young. I trained her and everything. I've seen her have her 4 kids.
Okay.
She's run an amazing organization that's grown globally sort of over the last 5 years. And what they're in a particular theater where they're doing quite well. My son happens to aspire into that space. What do you think I'm going to do? I pick up the phone and put the two together. Yep. And because the value systems match, they get on with it. There's a disconnect. There is a disconnect whether we want to accept or not. I just heard Amin talk about France conceptually and Francophone Africa. They're two different metaphors. And that's the issue. Yeah. Okay, it's like for like. If I'm investing, I'm more likely to invest, I excuse my biases, I make no apologies for them. I'm more likely to invest in a young man who is from Lagos, who is most likely Yoruba, okay?
Not to put a full point on it or anything.
Okay, that's the reality.
If I may on that, I think that's
Nigerian young man who is Yoruba, who you have invested in.
I think that's the reality, but it's also the issue that's happening here in East Africa.
Res ipso loquitur. The facts speak for themselves.
Yeah. Sorry, Anne, go ahead.
Please, apologies, Anne.
Yeah, no, I think that probably is the same issue that happens in East Africa. Like begets like. You know, what we find is that, if I ask one of the companies in our portfolio that have invested in and ask them, can you introduce me to other high promising, potential investees, and they introduce me to someone, it's likely going to be, another, white male that they know, given that, a lot of the entrepreneurs here are, expats, whether male or females, right? So I think maybe that as a fund manager for us is a bit of de-risking, in the same way, Tom, you're de-risking by making introduction, because you're risking your reputation, and I'm also risking capital. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's another issue that we need to discuss, is why we feel we have to de-risk by investing in like, so to speak.
So okay, and that gives me 2 questions to ask you. I have one question, which is what needs to change for the local funds to sort of show up in terms of the pool of funds available for entrepreneurs and for startups. So what do the pensions need to change? What needs to change in the way sort of our institutions think about funding or risk for money to show up for startups, for the startup ecosystem? But a second question that you just brought up is, if that money shows up, are you going to invest it in local entrepreneurs, or does your de-risking still have you putting that money into sort of comparatively safe, Western entrepreneurs or, white male founders, So, Anne, I'd like you to take it up, and then Mapaseka will come over to you for perspective on this as well.
Yeah, let me take the second one. It's a bit more practical and an easier question. So I think the answer is yes, right? So if you come by, you have a good idea, and there's a strong business case, then like absolutely, it doesn't matter who you are, who your father is, who your father knows, or your last name, right? Then like there is that, but I think the question is then, do you sort of say, look, I'm not getting enough pipeline, I'm not seeing enough people knocking on the door. Then what adjustments do I make to make sure that more people are showing up at showing up at the door, to make sure that indeed there's this healthy pipeline of people that's coming by asking for investment. So I think that the easy answer is probably yes. We will make those investments and the funding is there. The first question is a bit of a minefield, right? And what needs to change? It's like asking Tomiwa, how do you solve world peace, right?
We'll tackle that after. Right after this, we'll tackle that.
Exactly, right? That's for the next panel. But I do think that the very first step is an admission that something is broken, right? I mean, there's a value chain of actors in the investing spectrum, right? So you have the LPs, coming from east or west, all with different risk tolerances. Then you have your fund managers who are all incentivized differently, right? So Fund A versus Fund B has a very different risk profile. Both at a fund perspective, individuals are also biased, as we have so readily admitted here. So I think that space is also broken. And then I think the people who suffer as a result of those breakages in the value chain and in the system, unfortunately, are entrepreneurs. So I think maybe I don't have all of the answers, but I will say the first step is sort of, saying, X, Y, and Z are broken. And it's a full admission that everyone in the value chain, frankly, is to blame for this issue. And how do we hold people accountable for the gaps that we see?
Gotcha. Mapaseka, let me ask you, in terms of the investors that you see, Anne's just talked about pipeline. Do you see a pipeline that's full of local investors, of African investors, or do you see a pipeline that has a lot of foreign founders, white founders? You're operating out of South Africa, which is obviously a different sort of racial makeup than the rest of the continent. But what do you see pipeline-wise in terms of actual entrepreneurs building businesses?
Actually, here, because I'm based in Paris, I mostly see...
Sorry, actually, I was asking... Oh, sorry.
No, let him take it. Just let him continue. Continue, and then we'll thingy. I'll serve to that, because he looks primed and ready for this.
Okay, all right, sorry. So you first.
I was just about to say that I'm based in Paris, so I mostly have foreign investors.
Yeah.
Not really local here.
So, but you're connecting them with founders on the continent or founders in Europe as well?
Founders on the continent, if I can. Okay. Most of the time. Sometimes it's also people here, but less.
Okay. I think. So, when you're connecting with founders on the continent, are you seeing a lot of founders on the continent who are foreign founders, who are European founders on the continent, or are you mostly working with African founders on the continent?
Oh, if you ask me how many, I would say, Western French founders who have been funded to go to do business from France to Africa, I can list maybe 10 or 20 like this.
Okay.
Ask me how many African descent guy I know in France was funded to do something in Africa. I would say it's 0.
Yeah. No, so but when you're connecting sort of French money or European money with founders who are doing business on the continent. And so you're saying that mostly it's people who've left Europe to go to Africa to do that business? Is that?
In my perspective, just to let you know, so I'm working on a different side now. I'm trying to work on the business side. Let's say, for example, now I'm discussing with a very large group who wants to know, who wants to connect with local entrepreneurs who are doing identity, all the security with identity, when you have an ID card, when you have a blockchain. So we try to focus a lot on the business part because the investment part it's complicated. I mean, this is what Tommy said. You need to invest in someone okay? So basically, if you look at the problem from the beginning, it starts by the fact that when you start a project and you want to do a prototype, you start with friends and family. What friends and family you have when you are in Mali, and what friends and family you have when you are in Paris. That's very different from the beginning. So everything after is the same for the seed, for the Series A, for everything after. So at Afrobyte, we are trying to showcase numbers now, business numbers. That's very important because at the end of the day, I think that an investor starts to forget your color when he sees the green color. Show him the green color, and it's okay. He doesn't care if you are a violet or a pink or. So we have to accelerate business in Africa. This is the only shot. If we can't on just the moral stuff, we will go nowhere. I'm telling you.
Okay, fair. Seka.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I'm gonna say this, because of the startups that we work with, it's usually Black founders that we deal with, and Black founders that are actually addressing a problem that they are more equipped to handling. And most of our startups are from everywhere. So we have a startup in Germany, we have a startup in Tanzania, we have a startup in Nigeria, even in South Africa, that we work with. But a lot of them are African founders, and a lot of them are still fairly new into the space. So they don't know a lot about the investment space, about what funders look for and everything else. And every single time we do, the reason why Funema exists the way that we set up how we support our entrepreneurs has been to actually, when they do sit in front of the investors, we've kind of de-risked the whole entire investment so that they know there's people who are equipped, who know the space, who are behind these startups, who are supporting these startups. And I think it's something that we need to focus on a little bit more. Having been in the hub space and having been part of few incubators and worked with 3 incubators, a lot of conversations, we're not having frank conversation around investment and around how to protect your business, how to de-risk your business as a whole. So a lot of people would go for investors from the first go, and they're giving away a chunk of their money, devaluing and putting so much work on the next person who's going to be investing in you because there's so much conversations that are happening. So yes, I would we continuously go out of our way to find Black founders, but then are we going to say no to a white founder because of that? No, we wouldn't. But our preference is finding somebody who actually understands what they're addressing, the need that they're addressing, rather than it's about the understanding of the environment that you work in, the solution that you're building, and the people you're building for. Gotcha. Because I think that's how we would choose or how we would invest in startups and how we work with founders. Yes, it's not a very easy thing to look for also. Honestly, I have to say finding founders or finding startups that are aligned with what we want and what we do is not as easy as we would all like to think. Yes, there's a lot of startups as this, but you have to just invest in that time in finding them. Gotcha. And once you do find them, you know they're golden. So that's the joy.
Okay. Fantastic. Let me ask TD, What are you looking for in founders? What are you looking for that tells you like this founder or founding team is ready to build a business that matters, a business where the green will wash away any other colors,
My syndicate actually has a laundry list of things we look for, which is the basis of our thesis. But really, for me, it boils down into 3 fundamental C's.
Okay.
Character.
All right.
Does this person have integrity? Can I trust them? Are they believable? Is the first thing. Because without that, just go home and forget it. The second is confidence. Can they back, can they step in? Can they step up? Can they actually deliver the goods? And for me personally, the third is coachability. Because I'm in this to add value. If I can't, add value through coaching, then it's not worth it for me. So those are and everything else then derives from that, so to speak, in terms of what you look for in a founder, because you're looking for a partner, and that's sort of what makes, for me, angel investing different from being a VC, which I've resisted, but, it looks like I have to raise a fund, but that's a different story. It's actually the fact that we have this youthful energy in Africa, okay, that unfortunately our education system has stunted the development of. So you see, a lot of bright sparks that have been shackled by education. It's about being able to see through that and bring them through, because the kind of ventures, and it's not just about startups. I focus on startups, but you see some amazing SMEs there too, that are the backbone of the continent. But for me, it's fundamentally people who have a vision for a better Africa in the future and can deliver on that vision. That's really what I'm looking for. Does that help?
Yeah, that's useful. Anne, let me throw this at you. What are you looking for in founders, and sort of what do the best founders have that make it sort of easy or make it straightforward for them to find capital?
Yeah, I wish it was easy and straightforward for founders to find capital. But maybe just as a preamble to that, 2 things. One is I like the 3 C's Tommy has. I don't have anything as eloquent. But I will say that there is, in addition to the local founder gap, there's also a very, very strong gender gap.
Okay, you mentioned that.
Yeah, and a lot of it is really just the function of our systems. Like TD said, in education systems in Africa, like I went to schools, public schools, growing up in Kenya, and you sort of taught, not to question authority. You can't really raise up your hand and tell teacher, no, you're wrong. The sign of theta is actually X and not Y, right? And so, and I think the issue is even bigger with women, right? So even from a confidence perspective, I think you'll find, a man and a woman with the exact same level of talent, but a woman is less likely, not always, but often less likely to speak up, right? Which also brings about then this gender gap when it comes to funding. And then the second thing is, it sounds like a bit of a cliche.
Okay.
But it's quite true, where they say that, talent is universal, and opportunity is not, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And so when we're talking about local founders, there is no generic mold for a local founder, right? If you have, George, who grew up in Nairobi and went to University of Nairobi and went to all schools in Nairobi, he's very different from, Jane, who is also Kenyan and went to a Seven Oaks boarding school in the UK and then went to Princeton for her undergrad and then went to Stanford for her MBA. Technically, they're both local and they probably both hold Kenyan passports. But the level of access, the level of networks, the level of opportunity, the level of coaching
totally different. Yeah.
Is completely different, right? And I think that's something as entrepreneurs we need to as investors or people in the investment space need to have a lot of sensitivity to. So to answer your question, Tommy, I'll evade it by saying it depends, right? I think every individual is different.
Gotcha.
And I think some people sort of have this grit that you see the first meeting, that you're sort of captivated by them because they're very charming. And then you have some people where it takes 5 or 6 interactions to sort of get to who they are. But I think some of the basics, like the character, like integrity, as we've mentioned, is so important. If you come to my office and I offer you a glass of water, and I've said this before, and you don't say thank you to the person who brought you water, I will not invest in you, even if it's $1 billion opportunity, because I don't trust you to build teams. I don't trust you to treat people well. Yeah, so it depends.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Okay. I have some questions in the Q&A, some of which I'm going to start to get into. There's a question here around sort of what actually constitutes an expat versus who is a local sort of founder. And so this is from Alexis, which is, what's the determinant factor to be deemed an expat founder?
At the risk of sounding racist, for me, it's the black-white issue. It's not to do with it's at that deep fundamental level. Okay, if you're not white South African, I'm talking of white Americans specifically, and white Europeans specifically. Okay, actually, who are not born and bred on the continent. They've come as tourists. They've come in the last. I'm currently in the process actually of funding a white founder. Okay, but he's been in Nigeria 22 years.
This is asking about that because she's asking, or he's asking, I'm not sure if Alexis is a man or woman, about sort of Indian families that are like 2nd or 3rd generation expats.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus Christ, they're not expats, they're locals. Come on. It's like asking me about the Shagori brothers not being from Lagos. You must be joking. I'm talking of the tourists, okay? People who are born and bred in Brooklyn, New York, okay? They've gone to wherever. They are 27. They come to Africa, start of something, and get funded and go back.
And build cities.
Let's be very specific. We're not talking. We have local white people. I grew up with them. Those are not the people we're talking about here. We're talking of tourists, people who come and do what I call entrepreneurial tourism.
Gotcha. Okay, fair enough. Anybody else have a take on that? Any other thoughts around sort of what constitutes an expat versus a local?
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean,
lucky to be called expat. We are called migrants here.
Very critical point.
Good point. I lived in the US for about 10 years. I was never an expat. I was always an immigrant, no matter where I went.
You didn't have an expat club to go to?
None of the above.
No. You heard it here first. Entrepreneurial tourists.
But
those are the people we're talking about.
But I just want to add something which is very important for me.
Okay.
Even if we have these problems, this issue of black, white funding stuff, we still have to keep. I have mad respect for any entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. Someone who has conditions, I don't know, in Los Angeles or Austria, he had a good life, and he took his risk as an entrepreneur to do something in a remote country.
Okay.
Whatever we can say, that's entrepreneurship. That's pure entrepreneurship. It's like me going in India and starting. Even if I have the money, even if I'm backed by my family and my friends, I'm still out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
So for that, I keep on. I don't want to blame the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
No. We can't blame. It's not the. Remember, we started. This is not about the entrepreneurs.
No.
Yeah. It's about entrepreneurial tourism.
Exactly.
From the part of the funders, and I mentioned them earlier, Sequoia and the others, who know exactly what they're doing.
Exactly.
Okay. This is not taking away from the young kids. No, who are doing this. No, that's not what I'm talking about.
I mean, I know. There are a couple of.
Let's hear from Man and Seka.
Um,
And yeah,
I have a question, and I cannot understand why Alexis would ask this question of who actually constitutes an expat in South Africa. Well, based on South Africa, where you see how many people get funding, and it's usually like different rate, not as many black founders as white founders. And then you have these people who have dual citizenship where, yes, my parents are born in South Africa, but like half of my family is in Austria. So how do you then, where does that come into play? Because if you're going to be saying tourists, in a sense, this person already has both their legs in two countries. And because of that, they are a lot more better compared to any other white South African who was born and bred in South Africa and lived in South Africa. So like, I understand the question, and it becomes one of those black and white. It can't be like a black and white, or there's a gray area there. So how do we then justify what is an expat? And based on just saying it can't just be somebody. I don't think somebody from South Africa who's lived 10 or 15 years in Austria and then comes back to South Africa is kind of, can we really say that they're South African to a point?
I mean,
And that's
they are, aren't they?
but then that's a South African system of Cape Town, guys. Like a lot of these people having worked at Bloomberg, where half of my colleagues' parents are either in London or everything else. So as much as they're just putting in the hours, they know like South Africa is not where they belong. As much as they are citizens in South Africa, let's be clear, they are. But are we really going to call them local founders?
I mean, I can speak to that. And she spoke to, the person who's got their Stanford degree and spent, 15 years in the US. And it's quite, a different sort of like story for that person. It's hard to say they're identical to somebody who's a local founder and have spent all their lives and have all their networks in the same country and haven't spent any time, haven't built networks outside of the country.
Can I turn this on its head?
Sure.
Just listening to Seka there, I think we've been looking at the wrong question. Okay. What we really should be looking at are the fundamentals, the why. Why are we interested? Why do we care? And if you look at it from this perspective of, do they create jobs locally? Okay. Does the profit that is made by the company, is it reinvested or is it distributed locally? If we start taking that approach, then you see how irrelevant it becomes who gets the money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but then, I mean, it does ask the question of, well, why are we having this conversation? Actually, Hilton's got a great question here where he's like, look, immigrant business owners in the USA build high growth businesses. Should the ecosystem not be embracing all stakeholders? China is targeting investment in Africa big time. The USA and EU can't be the only targets in this conversation. So, what do we think when the Chinese come with truckloads of capital? But does it matter basically if, people are building big companies in Africa? Does it matter what color they are or where they're from? What do we all think? TD, I think you've given us a bit of your perspective. Seka, Anne, thoughts? Amin?
The question becomes, what are those expectations that come with that investment? And what do we have to give up? Yes, it's all great that we can embrace people and everything else, but the question becomes, are we, in the long term, what are we giving up? Or in the long-term purpose, do the benefits outweigh the cost of what we are going to be doing? Yes, I do think that if we are global, we live in a world that's where we need to work with everybody, and we can't just build the ecosystem by just ourselves. And we don't have the traction, or our pension funds and everything else are not investing in our startups. Somebody is. So yes, but then how do we still then have that conversation to say, how do we still inflict the change? How do we get our pension funds into matching whatever is coming from abroad? Because it can't just be us looking at people coming into this space and saying, because they are dictating on what is going to happen and how this space grows. And that is not a very fair, or that is not a very much where we want to be, because we don't want to find like 90% of our investors are from China, and then none of our none of our funders in Africa are actually investing in Africa. So because then they're not building Africa, other people are, and they then also get to drive how the market grows and what the market does. So
yeah, so allow me to express a bit of an unpopular opinion.
Bring it on.
Okay.
So I think one is, I think we should not in any way sort of discount the positive effects we've gotten from having foreign capital in our markets, right? Because without this foreign capital, whether we like it or not, we would not have as advanced startup ecosystems in this different markets, right?
Agreed.
I think on the same end of the spectrum, we should also not discount the all of the good work that's been done by expert founders regardless of the market, right? I think a lot of them make sacrifices and that not everyone's willing to make, but and that should also not be discounted. But I think on the other hand, it's a tough question with a bit of a nuanced answer, in the sense that it's a global world, but it's not a level playing field, right? So then the question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we level the playing field, right? Both in terms of investment coming in exits, and capital allocation, because if you have some good local, quote unquote, local founded businesses that are able to, across the spectrum, get good investment from local LPs, and have that capital recirculating locally and have a strong exit that brings returns to the founders, to their investors, then I think that would be a wonderful success story. But it just, unfortunately, just hasn't happened yet. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it should be done within like those two perspectives, which I think there's a natural tension between the two, which is, one, I think we still need foreign funds, but two, it's also not a level playing field for everyone.
So let me ask you, okay, let's hear you.
Yeah, I just want to address this question of, there is someone coming from the outside, coming and creating jobs. Okay, we have an experience of that here in France. As you know, France, they have a lot of possessions all across the globe. Mayotte, Indian Ocean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Guyana, it's everywhere. Trust me, go on a map, look at France, how big it is, it's everywhere. Okay. So now, let's say we talk about Martinique and Guadeloupe. Okay, people are coming, they do business, and and they invest locally and they create employment, but there's a problem there. I mean, this society in Guadeloupe or in Martinique is basically unfair. I mean that if we have a founder who comes from, I don't know, Poland or whatever, and he comes and he does a business, and he makes sure that he can have a managing director who is local at high position. But if the job creation is just for the low-paid job, that doesn't work. It's just repeating the inequalities. So it's not a problem if you have a foreigner that comes. We just have to make sure that after, we can find locals that, at, big position in the company. Because otherwise, it's like we just had the conversation about 1 hour ago about diversity and inclusion in tech. Some companies saying that, we have a lot of black people. Yeah, but they are let's talk about Amazon. Okay, we have a lot. Yeah, but where does they work exactly at Amazon?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the question after. It's just to make sure. I think that Tommy is right. we have to look at the impact. You are right. We have to look at the impact, but we have to look at both impact, positive and negative, and try to find the right balance between both aspects.
Gotcha. Let me ask, Anne mentioned, look, there's a lot of work to do. So I want to ask, I want to go around and ask sort of specific things that each person thinks we can do that will actually sort of level the playing field, that makes it easier for local founders to earn cash. And I mean, let me start with you, and then I'll go to Toby. I'll go to TD, and then Seka, and end with Anne. Just look specifically, I mean, starting with you. So
first, I want to say something. AfriLabs is getting more than 200 tech hubs, 47 countries. We should be vocal on that and say that's the world's biggest startup tech hub gathering in the world because of the 47 countries. I think this is something we don't say enough. Say like, okay, we are doing something very good. Even what we are doing now, it's, I think that now I'm very positive for the future about Africa and even the founders, because I think that what has created this COVID crisis, I'm sorry to say that, but that's an opportunity for Africa. Because what we are doing right here, we were doing this last year. So we know that for entrepreneurs, what matters is the network. It's a network that gives you access to investment, to business. So we have to keep on having this culture of building those networks, exactly what we are doing right now. It's very important. And this is where we will probably find an answer, because we will be more efficient, we will have more efficient businesses, and it will attract naturally the investment, no matter our color.
Gotcha. TD?
Well, at the risk of sounding arrogant, I think we really need to do what we're doing. What do I mean by that? Rebecca yesterday announced Catalyst as one of the applications that we're seeing from the partnership of the Africa Business Angel Network and AfriLabs. What we're hoping to create through that is an economic development engine that sees startups that are created in our hubs being mentored, being advised, and being funded by angel investors that are in the cities which the hubs belong. So it's a city-centric, not country-centric. It's a city-centric strategy that should see funding, going where it belongs. So that's sort of the first at the grassroots level. Next level up is the work that Inya Poeti, I have mentioned him a couple of times now, but he's not alone. There are others working to ensure in places like Nigeria, South Africa should be doing it. They've started the aggregated institutional funding. Some of it is allocated to this early stage investment as funds of funds, so that they are funding local VCs. Because right now, VCs are offshoring. They have to offshore to find LPs that would allow them to do the kind of ticket sizes that allow for follow-on funding in Series A. If we can crack that nut with institutional investors locally, then we're well on our way. We need the foreign money, don't get me wrong. We need these external investments. We can't build a continent without them. But we need them in partnership, not in leadership. And right now, what is happening is we're seeing them in leadership, and that is obfuscating the African agenda. That's why we are having this conversation. I hope that helps.
Gotcha. I think it is, and I think that's a very practical and sort of like ground level next step. Seka, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with Chami on saying like we sort of need to be educating on a ground level ourselves on our investors and on our founders, so working with our founders and actually making them aware of what's happening, but then also working with these guys who are funding to actually be saying, how do we introduce you to our local startups, like our local, what is happening on a local space? So AfriLabs as a network has so many hubs. They are there and they could provide that leading voice and that partnership, they could drive that partnership drive that we need to drive. It can't be like what Tony was saying, can't be them being leading on what happens in our sector. But then as AfriLabs, as any other networks and enablers, how do we actually start engaging on behalf of our founders? How do we start putting together these angel networks in a spaces where we are based, so that we can actually being able to start driving our banks, being aware of what is happening. So our institutional funding themselves, knowing that this is a sector that is available and it's ready, it needs their investment and their partnership in the space.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Thanks, Amin, Tommy, and Sek. I think I agree fully with everything that you've said, and I think all of these are very, very practical. I think just to add to that, I think we're Africans, and as Africans, we like committees, right? And we like talking, right? So then maybe I think there are a lot of sort of, round table committee level discussions should happen where you literally bring everyone to the table, right? So bring the LPs, so current LPs, Chicago Teachers Pension Fund, and non LPs who could be LPs, like Kenyan pension funds, and just bring everyone to the table, right? You have representatives from investors, like IAFCA is very strong in East Africa, South African Venture Capital Association, entrepreneurs, right? Different actors in the system, and let's actually sort of grind this out, bring the facts to the table, and come up with a couple of very, very actionable solutions, knowing that this is a multi-year effort that needs to address a lot of systemic challenges that we see.
That's it.
And then come up with, these are quick wins, right? So here are some quick wins. Quick is relative, that we can bring up in the next 1 to 2 years, like standardizing term sheets. So you have like a standard term sheet that's used across, across East Africa, across West Africa, right? Having small, like, educative sessions for local entrepreneurs that, say, you have a great business idea, how do you communicate it? While working on some of the larger systemic challenges in parallel.
Gotcha. We've only got about 6 minutes left, so I just want to ask a couple of the questions in here. I've got a question from Hilton around, should funding only be geared to startups? What about going enterprise? Do we have common metrics on what a startup is and what a startup is not? And when is a startup fundable? TG, should funding only be geared to startups, or what about going enterprise? Yeah.
It's just the growth rate of startups, if they're real, is what makes them appealing to angel investors and VCs. It's about that, that growth trajectory. Growth enterprises should have funding too, but again, it's not an area I know much about, so I tend not to speak about things I don't know.
Fair enough. Okay. I'm going to let that be the answer to that one. So, question: if funded startups with. So there's another question here. If funded startups with expat founders are getting their funding from their home country of the expat, I guess that's an interesting question. I'm trying to make sense of it. Are funded startups with expat founders getting their funding from their home countries? I guess they're getting their funding from everywhere. Does anybody have any experience with this? Are French founders necessarily getting funding from France? Are American founders necessarily getting funding from America?
I think that's the general trend.
That's the general trend.
Yeah, that seems to be it. Yeah, because again, it's back to what we talk about, type matching.
Yeah. Rebecca, some of them get it from Africa, which I know happens as well. Yeah, we've talked about that. Okay. What roles are banks playing in Africa in helping startups locally? TD, we're not even going to let you talk. I don't want a Nigerian talking about this because this conversation could go very, very badly. Second,
Well,
is there anything in South Africa? How are banks engaging startups?
So I know, like with South Africa, we have that enterprise development thing that they're doing, and now they also have what do you call innovation offices where they actually go out and hunt for startups that are in the fintech space. But in terms of that being readily available to say, like in South Africa, like, hey, Standard Bank has this amount of money available to startups and this is how you go and find it and everything else. It's not like that information is available where you can just go into it. It's a network related thing. So yes, there is a push where you're seeing startups working with banks rather either doing the IP, the proof of concept or anything like that. But in terms of us knowing if they're investing into startups, to an extent, it's not that information that is not as readily as available as we would love to see information available on VCs and who they're investing in.
Gotcha. I've got a couple of comments around that saying sort of the banks have startup funding, but the processes and requirements are onerous or they're being poorly sort of implemented. So lots of information in there. TD, was there something you did want to say? Someone's asking me why I stopped you from answering that question.
well, okay, I'll just put it simply. Okay, bank, risk. Startup, risk. Need I say more?
Yeah. Nigerian startups, Nigerian banks have zero appetite for like funding anything as risky as a startup. I know. Everyone you get 25% and 125% backed by collateral, which does make it, a bit ridiculous. There's a question from Giram here, which is, what is the impact? And this is for Anne specifically. What is the impact on African entrepreneurs of having fund mostly from Western funding agencies? Why the African funding agencies are small in number to fund projects in Africa. So, I mean, this is kind of the overall question we've been asking here. I guess let me just extend that question a little bit and say,
sure.
We talked about local investors investing in sort of agriculture or real estate, not doing very much in terms of innovation. Do we see any changes in that? Do we see any shifts in that? And do we have a sense of what it takes to shift that? Anne first, and then anybody else who wants to answer that.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So I think if I may even just tie this in with the previous question around the banks. I think if you look at, there are there are a lot of positive externalities that come from either sort of foreign or local funding, which I think, as I've mentioned before, should not be discounted. But I think the way startups are geared, you're going to have a valley of death for many years, chances are, and you need to have capital that's going to come in and fund that valley of death, right? So a lot of times you need very patient capital, right? Banks want to see cash flows, and you're not going to be cash flow positive for many years. And so if that's the case, then how do you sort of, match the very high cash needs of businesses over the value of death that they're going to go through, regardless of the source of that money, right? I think a dollar is fungible. A dollar from Tommy and a dollar from Anne is still a dollar. Yeah. But what else comes with it that really goes beyond the capital?
Okay. Fantastic. We've kind of come to the end time-wise of what we have for this conversation. I do have to say it's been really, really interesting. Also, it's a fantastic audience, lots of really interesting conversations in the comments. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. But I want to thank Amin, TD, and Mapaseka. Thank you all so much for taking the time and coming to engage with this, but it's been super, super interesting, actually. And thank you, AfriLab, for having us and for pulling this together. Hi, Mark.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Hi, Tom. Thank you to the panelists.
Thank
you very
so
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Good job. Good job.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. So my job is to thank you all. Thank you, Tomiwa, for a very invigorating panel discussion. And my job now is to invite us. We're going to move over to the next group, which is going to be hosted by Mozilla and AfriLab's Innovation Ecosystem. We'll be listening into a conversation with Nkesa Were of AfriLabs and Alice Munua of Mozilla, and they will be hosting a short conversation. So let's move over to the AfriLabs Mozilla Innovation Ecosystem roundtable discussion now.